let go of the belief that, I can control anything in this world, and really grappling with, not only was I about to be diagnosed with cancer, but my husband and I were also splitting up after being together for 13 years. Somebody said to me, "You should go see Wendy. Wendy's a shaman." And I did not know what that meant. I needed healing to address and heal the part of me that actually didn't really want to be alive. And then I thought, oh, it almost feels like this is the spirit of the universe. And maybe that's what God is.
Welcome to the Spacious Unknown. I'm your host, Kat Buccentini. This podcast is a place where stories of spiritual lives can be shared, especially those that are a little unconventional. Stories shaped by curiosity and doubt, tenderness and intuition, grief and joy, and the quiet practice of inner listening. Before we begin, a gentle note. Spirituality is alive and always unfolding. What you hear now is one moment in time, one expression of someone's path. I invite you to listen with grace, curiosity, and a tenderness that leaves room for nuance rather than neat conclusions. Today, I'm joined by KATRINA, and I invite you to settle in as we explore the shape of her journey. KATRINA, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Why don't we start with who you are? Introduce yourself. What's your background, life story? Not life story, your life situation.
Okay. Starting from this moment, at this point in time, I am working in the spiritual care arena, primarily as a shamanic counselor and, actually, I mix the words up, spiritual counselor and shamanic mentor and teacher. I also work at an interfaith seminary called the Chaplaincy Institute. And that's kind of my day job in a way, but not really. So essentially, I work with people one-on-one. Spiritual direction is the format I'm using. And over the years, I've been doing that. More and more people have gotten focused on the shamanic work that I do. And so that's sort of my work story. I came from a background of being a therapist and an expressive arts therapist specifically. So I kind of bring that into my work now in terms of working with imagery and metaphor, and which is different than the shamanic work, but it does come into the spiritual counseling and as well as the psychological. I don't think that there is a strong line between the psychological and the spiritual. I mean, they are different arenas, but they interweave in the space between the two. So sometimes I'm working in that space with people between the spiritual and the psychological. That's all about my work. And personally, I live in an old house in Portland, Maine, with 2 big, loud dogs and 6 chickens in the backyard and a big garden. And that's like my personal joy, all of that. So, yeah, that's the brief version.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with a little centering meditation for us, centering and grounding. And part of this is an invitation to describe what you are sensing out loud as we go through it, to give our listeners kind of a sense of your space that you're in and what things look like for you or feel like for you. So we'll just start. So you can close your eyes, or if you want to leave them unopened, you can just let them unfocus on something and take 3 deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth, just letting everything kind of slip away and relax as you breathe out. And you're going to start by noticing the places where your body touches the space around you.
I can feel one foot on the ground. I feel another foot on the velvet footrest on the other side. I feel my sit bones on the chair.
And then start to notice the air around you.
I can feel the different temperatures because the floor is cold. the outside air is cold. I feel it coming in through my feet, but the rest of me is warm inside the center space of this room.
And start to notice the sounds that that air is carrying to your ear.
Very quiet. The space is very quiet. The birds aren't busy right now. There's no wind. I hear a little bit of far off traffic, but it's very quiet, actually.
And then as you breathe in through your nose, picking up any scents lingering in the air.
I think I can smell just a little bit of my tea at the table beside me. Kind of tangy. And that bitter, tangy smell of black tea.
Mm. Can you start to notice the taste lingering in your mouth, in the back of your throat, on your tongue?
Yeah, that lovely Ceylon black tea. No honey. A little bitter, bitter in a good way, but also light, clear flavor.
And then turning inwards, I invite you to notice a place of stillness. It can be really small. Just notice where you're holding a place of stillness in your body right now.
The feeling of stillness, which may be different than what my body is doing physically, but the feeling of stillness, I feel in two places right now. Really in the sort of root of my belly, like the pelvic bowl area, just like a solid stillness in that place, just a quiet, but then also up kind of between my shoulders, I mean, kind of like in that little space at the bottom of your throat. It feels very still there, even though I'm breathing, of course.
I just invite you to breathe into that stillness, allowing yourself to rest there for a little while. And whenever you're ready to rejoin me, you can open your eyes, but take your time. Welcome back, Katrina.
Thank you.
I want to start with learning a little bit about your formation in spirituality. What was that like growing up? What were your earliest formations and the people, the places, the things that formed you spiritually as a child?
I feel lucky to have grown up for most of my childhood in a Bahá'í home. My parents were both active Bahá'ís when I was in the first half of my childhood, and I experienced that faith as a very loving and very diverse community-based goodness. And the people who, it's not a large community, at least not the one that we grew up in, which was quite small, but just like I really heard what I now might call in some ways idealism, but deep belief in goodness and oneness of humanity, and that God was a support and a caring presence, and there was no injury in that. It was all very loving and encompassing, and the community was very connective. And I went to the feasts, as they're called, the Baha'i feasts, which were held in people's homes, and we would read, and even the children would get to read a piece from the writings, and then we would share a meal, and it was very loving. That had a deep impact on me. It's also actively anti-racist and anti-nationalism, so it really taught a oneness of humanity that I so appreciate growing up with. That was really the biggest formation, religiously speaking. And other than that, sort of in the second half of my childhood, because we moved in the middle, so a lot of things changed. I lived out in the country most of the time and had big, wide open spaces and trees to climb and just sit down in a tree for hours. I don't know if it was literally hours, but it felt like it was hours. And, built my own space in the back field. And it was a beautiful, expansive outdoor space that felt very alive and welcoming. And that has always stayed with me also as a place where spirit is alive for me. Those were the earlier ones in my childhood.
And as you grew older, what did that look like?
Well, I kind of left all of that. I mean, I didn't leave the love for the outdoors, but I was no longer part of the Bahá'í faith for reasons to do with their rules that the little bit I don't agree with, I couldn't work with. And during my 20s, I was actually really strongly rooted in 12-step programs. And I've only recently realized how strongly that was a part of my spiritual formation. And the process of learning to turn one's life over and to trust that there is something beyond oneself that you can let go and let God. I didn't really have a very good understanding of the concept God, and it's not a term I use much now, but I use it as sort of a reference for the whole realm of spirit. As I use the word spirit, and I think it's diverse and has multiple faces that different people see. But the 12-step programs were a very strong rootedness in a different approach to spirituality, and that very much had an impact in terms of being able to let go of the belief that, I can control anything in this world, and really grappling with, as it's continued through life, grappling with uncertainty and unpredictability and the great mysteries that we don't understand and we can't explain, but we live with them. So there was that period where I was in 12th step, but also just kind of spiritually eclectic and kind of wandering. I did a fair amount of Buddhist readings and the sort of the New Age version of looking at all kinds of different things. But then when I was in my early 40s, I hit a period of great duress. I moved across country with my family, but left with my husband and 2 children, but left husband at the time, left my other whole family at home and didn't really know many people at all when we moved to San Francisco, and it was overwhelming and big. And then my beloved grandmother had heart failure 2 weeks after we moved, and we were 3,000 miles away. And I still feel how hard that was. And to be honest, I went into a depression because I was very alone and grieving very deeply. And she took a while to die, which was a blessing for all of us. But when she did die, I was pretty lost. And somebody said to me, because I didn't know what to do, I knew that therapy was not really what I needed, because therapy is different than what one needs when they're in sort of a spiritual crisis, which is what I felt like it was, but I didn't know what to do with it. So somebody said to me, "You should go see Wendy. Wendy's a shaman." And I did not know what that meant. Of course, I'd heard the word shaman, but I didn't know anything about shamanism. But I went and saw Wendy. And from the first time I saw her, it really shifted things for me spiritually. This was sort of the biggest turning point in my life, spiritually speaking, because I don't know how she did it in just 1 hour, but she somehow gave me directions and led me through my first shamanic journey, and which I'd never done before. And for those who don't know anything about shamanism involved a direct connection to spirits and to spirit helpers in different ways and different helpers. And, it's different for different people, of course, but it was like coming home for me. It was a very strong recognition that this was a spiritual path that I felt like I belonged in, because I could connect directly and feel the presence of spirit with me more tangibly than I ever had before. And so I started seeing Wendy regularly. I started working at the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, meaning studying there, taking courses, and then taking their 3-year intensive training. And that entirely deepened and sort of, I am getting this image of like when something finds its shape and like gels or becomes the thing it's meant to become. And that was spirituality for me. And that was just over 20 years ago at this point. So it's been a while now. And it has only, I mean, there's like every practice, I've had phases of more or less, intensity of it. But in the last number of years, it has just deepened and deepened. And that's sort of how I've landed where I am now. Although I do want to say, after another piece that had a huge impact on me was only a couple years after I started doing shamanism, if even, I was diagnosed with cancer.
Hmm.
And I was young. And it was an aggressive cancer and pretty scary. And I did all the medical things that needed to be done or almost all, to keep myself alive. And I also did a whole lot of shamanic work and came through that with, as I understand it, profound help from my spirit helpers and my spiritual practice. And I could talk for hours about probably not hours, but the journeys that happened that made clear to me how I needed to affirm my commitment to life and to being present. Like, I don't know how else I would have gotten that, but I got it through my journeys, practice, and through my direct communications from my spirits, from my helpers. So following that, I was really, really called once I got through the cancer treatment and started my recovery, which has wonderfully since then just been continuous. I've had not a recurrence. I didn't want to go back to being a therapist, which I had been. And then when I was going back to work a bit later, I didn't want to just be a therapist because the spirituality was so central in my own path and it had become so important to me. So I went to the interfaith seminary that I still work at now. It's called the Chaplaincy Institute. And I learned about all different faith traditions and the different beliefs and the different practices. And I was training to be a chaplain. I thought I would be a hospice chaplain, which I never actually have done. But I really deeply learned how, in my perception, all these different spiritual paths have so much in common at core, and that I could see even through my shamanic lens, which was my home base, I could relate to and sort of embrace other traditions, even though they're not my own, and I wasn't going to become a Muslim or a Christian, or any of the ones we studied, but I could really see the commonalities, that they're all different pathways to spirit, and that spirit is alive, meaning a vibrant presence in all. That seminary gave me a broader understanding of spirituality, but it also gave me the teachings to know how to work with people. So then I studied spiritual direction, which is really my home base. And that's the one-on-one or small group practices of really helping other people find their spiritual paths. It's my calling. It's my joy. Yeah. So that's sort of like, in my mind, the end of the story, even though I'm sure I'm not at the end of the story yet. So.
Yeah. I have a bunch of places where I want to go back and like get a little more information. So you mentioned leaving the Baha'i faith and moving into the 12-step program. And I feel like there's a chunk there missing somewhere. And so I'm curious, however much you're comfortable sharing, like some of the things that came up for you that had you move from one thing to another thing to another, as you moved along, like what came up that felt like there's more here for me to find that I need to find outside of what I'm in right now?
Yeah. Well, it's the not continuing as a Baha'i was really more just about, as I said, their guidelines for what an active Baha'i needs to follow. And essentially, I have no problem with the no alcohol rule. That's not a problem. But they also don't advocate, or they don't allow, if you're a Baha'i, that you have an active sexual life with anybody you're not married to, who's the opposite gender. So that just doesn't, it's not my political stance, and it isn't my personal way of life either. So while I do love that faith, I don't even know if they still really hold that belief, but it was the original teachings that they still held strongly when I was a kid and a young adult. Actually, even when I was an older adult, and I was briefly investigating the Baha'i faith again. So for me, it was really more about, okay, how do I become my authentic self in all the different versions that one faith can't hold? And then the movement toward 12th step was really, it was a relational outcome, let's call it, that for reasons to do with childhood challenges, let's say, I tended to be in a lot of relationships with addicts, and I was very much in a community where a lot of substance use and addiction was standard. While it became evident in the long run that I myself am not an addict, I very much had patterns of behavior and relating that the 12 steps were just, and Al-Anon in particular, were just the perfect way to work with them. Like, therapy always has a place in my mind in some situations, but the 12-step programs really are spiritual programs about, identifying that you have an issue and then realizing that turning to whatever your understanding of God is, that is a support. So that's sort of why I went really into that for, I think it was about 8 years. I went to meetings like 3 times a week and was very much working. What does it mean to turn your life over? What does it mean to believe that there is a higher power that can help? And I will say that I didn't mention this, but it certainly is a big part of my ongoing spiritual work and deepening is the question of trust for spirit specifically. I didn't have distrust in the sense that my early experiences of God in the Baha'i faith were very positive, but I didn't have a strong sense of the presence of spirit. Once I started doing shamanism, I did more so, but even then, it took me years, really years and years, like many years, to start to really believe that spirit can show up in ways that we can't explain. I can't possibly explain what happens when I do journeys and things happen. But I have come to believe that it does happen. It doesn't happen on my terms because life is never on my terms, but there is some force, some power that is a compassionate, loving presence that my spiritual practice connects me to. And I do it through shamanism. I think other people do it through their own differently identified practices under different names, but I think it's the same thing. And it's taken me, like I've said, decades and decades to deepen my trust that there is a presence there and that presence has a power to it. So I don't know if I even answered your question. I went off in a whole other direction, but
That is totally fine.
uh-huh. Very, very much a central part of my spiritual development for sure. And I'm still working it. It's still a challenge. I mean, how old am I? 63. And I still have to remind myself sometimes that, oh, right, spirit is there to help. Whatever that might look like, it's there.
You described this experience of seeing Wendy, the shaman, or for shamanism, the first time. And I was wondering if you could describe what that experience was like a little bit, or what happened for people who aren't familiar with those types of journeys. Like, what happened for you in it, and or maybe there's another experience that really stands out for you that would be a good way to explain it.
Thank you for reminding me that many people don't know what that is, what that work is, of course. I don't specifically remember my first journey, but I can tell you the essential pieces of my very, very early journeys, like the first few journeys.
Mhm.
The process is that you essentially enter into a somewhat altered state of mind. It's not as deep as like hypnosis or something like that, but there's usually a soundtrack, at least in the tradition I have followed, which is core shamanism. There is a very repetitive rhythmic beat. So when a journey begins is when the drumming or the rattle begins. And it goes continuously at a completely steady beat for as long as you are going to be journeying, which sometimes people do a very short journey, like 5 minutes. More commonly, it's 15, 20, 30 minutes. And the drum beats or rattle beat or whatever the sound is stays the same, usually. That's sort of standard or maybe more traditional. But on the other hand, I know other people do different things. And there are other soundtracks, like didgeridoo is a soundtrack that's not totally constant and consistent. There are other kinds of soundtracks. But what is critical is that the sonic driver, as it's called, continues through your journey, whatever it is. That begins, and you imagine yourself either traveling down into the earth or traveling up beyond the earth into levels of reality that are not ordinary reality. So you're not like underground and in the dirt when you go down into the lower world. And that's what I did first. I went into the lower world, and that's where I've always been more of my journeys. So I traveled down into a lake and swam down to the bottom of the lake, and then I discovered a tunnel. So I crawled through the tunnel, and then I dropped out of the tunnel into this onto the sand beach. This is not a place I've actually been to. The lake was. I know the lake. I still go there. But the tunnel and then the beach, and then I was in a landscape that was like places on the planet, but not a place I'd ever been before. And in my first journeys, I was approached by a couple different figures, one of which was a bird who then transformed into a human. And he introduced himself as the bird, but then he was the human. And that's still the name I use for him. And he became from that, I think he was one of the very first spirits that showed up. And he remains a central helper and teacher for me in my journeys. So at that point, I don't even know what I might have asked him, but, it was probably something general like, what would you like to show me? Or, what do I have to learn from you? Or something like that. And I don't know where he took me, but it was at that point like following the lead of the spirit helper if I wanted to, but I could come back anytime I didn't want to follow what he was leading me into, which is sort of generally how journeys do work. Another time, however, I went down, and I think one of the next ones I met was a big lion who just showed up. And lion never talks to me, but he has a very strong presence. And I came to understand somehow, because in journeys, some spirits might talk to you. Many times spirits convey information in some other way. Like, it can be all kinds. They can show you things that somehow tell you something. You can just get a sense of knowing sometimes, like intuiting something from them. And it became very clear to me that lion was my protector. And I don't know if someone told me that or if it was just made known somehow. So lion became someone, because it was soon thereafter that I was diagnosed with cancer, and lion was, I think, showing up partly to help carry me through that, among some others. And then at the end of the journey time, the rhythm pauses and then changes in some way that indicates, okay, the journey is over. It's time to come back. So then people in their mind, which means in the journey they're in, they turn around and retrace their steps to come back to the place that they started and see themselves entering back up into this world or back down into this world and then back into their body. And then there they are back home. So that's what a journey looks like. And I think those early experiences of encountering a figure that was clearly not just a human. It wasn't like I was just dreaming of a person. I mean, I know dreams actually go all kinds of places, very similar to journeys, by the way. Dreams can be very much like journeys and journeys very much like dreams. Some cultures think of them as the same, actually. But it was that experience of something happening that I knew I wasn't making it up, because even though for years that was my first trust challenge, was thinking, well, maybe I'm just making this up and I don't realize it. I finally got over that one when things started happening that I could never have made up. It was that encounter, right? That encounter with another being, and that being in a journey is like, it has a vibrancy to it. And I can't exactly explain it, because a lot of times when I think about journeys, I think that there are senses that come alive or that are in use that are not the ones that we usually think of in our ordinary reality, and that things happen that are hard to explain because it's a different way of being almost. So somehow finding that is what felt so significant about the journey.
Yeah, I love that. That's a lot of the ways that I've come to see our spirits and souls talking to us, is not in words or anything that we even necessarily understand on a conscious level, but this deeper symbolism, sometimes just sensations. I guess I'm curious, how is one guided into this altered state that you mentioned? What is that? You mentioned like what it was on your end. What was it like? How does Wendy guide you into that space, and how do you guide others into that space, and then continue to guide them as they go through the experience?
Essentially, the core pieces are, when people take a journey, you start by, as I referred to, imagining a place on this planet that you've been to that is a place that you can go up or a place that you can go down physically. Like it could be a tree or a mountain going up, or a tower, stone tower, any kind of tower. You can go down through a well, through tree roots, through a cave. And you start to go, you start to imagine yourself going in that direction. And this is when it is like active imagination. And you do that when the beat sounds boom, 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 boom. And it's a fast drum beat or rattle. And you keep going until you feel like you've gone to a place that is different, like you've gone through some sort of a membrane or a level. Like for me, when I go down, it's when I pop out of the lake water and the tunnel, and there I am on the beach, and I'm like no longer in water, and like, oh, this is now a different reality. When I go up, I climb a bunch of different things and this is where active imagination is where you start. And I started by climbing up a cliffside path in California. And then when I got to the top, I didn't feel like I was in another reality, but then a rope ladder appeared, and I started climbing up this rope ladder. It just appeared in front of me. And then I got to the end of the rope ladder, and then a set of ice stairs appeared, like this ice stairway. And I climbed up the icy stairway, and lo and behold, at the top of the icy stairway, there was a manhole. A manhole, which totally not what I would ever have thought, but that's what it was. And I lifted it up and got out, and then there I am in a totally different place. And upper world looks very different than the lower world, totally not what anything was like in my journey upward. So when you do that kind of a process of going up or down, you have entered into the levels, the upper world or the lower world, which each have multiple different levels. But the teachings, and these are like common across the world, the teaching is that all of the spirits that reside there, or that you will meet there, are compassionate helpers. That they're not going to do anything that brings you any harm or lead you into any harm, so that you can choose to work with them or not. But what they're offering you is neutral at worst, and beneficial most likely. So that's the safety guideline that I hold as most important. And the very sort of nuts and bolts of a journey, it's always good that you do that. One would do that in a place where you're well, not necessarily enclosed, but not to be interrupted. Like, I have journeyed outside in the forest or by the lake, by a lake, but you want to not be interrupted. You don't want to have your phone on. You don't want to have traffic and doorbells and things like that, so that you can go on the journey and leave your physical body in a place where it's safe and you know that it's safe, but your soul can travel to these other levels of consciousness.
Mm. Is there a time of integration afterwards, where like processing of the experience and their interpretation? I'm curious what happens after the journey, if that part of the journey is completed.
Yeah, good question. It's a great idea for people to write down a journey, because that's a way to hold on to the details, similar to a dream. But sometimes people will actually talk about, like, if they're in a group, like I host a couple groups, one online and one in person here in Portland, and we journey together, and then people will often share their journeys. Sometimes before they write, they might make a couple notes, but they will share their journeys in the group. Sometimes people don't share because they don't want to share, which is entirely welcome. But sometimes people can get feedback that can be helpful when they do share. And this is the group context. And other times people don't want to share at all because they're still really processing what happened. When it's one-on-one, like when you're working with a mentor, when I work with somebody, we may each take a minute, because I journey while my clients journey also when I do it one-on-one. And we each will write down, again, just sort of highlights to remind us of some of the things that happened. But then we come together and the person will tell me their journey, and I might ask some questions, and they may have questions, because usually when I'm working with people, they're fairly well, all of my one-on-one clients are doing the shamanic mentoring piece. They are newer in their journey. They haven't been doing this for years and years. So they may have questions, because the journeying in session is part of how they're learning about the format. And so there's a lot that they don't yet know, some of which comes up in a journey, so they'll ask about it. So there's this sort of combination of integrating what happens by sharing it, but also learning more about the practice of shamanism. One of the things, however, that I go back to over and over again is that in this practice, the spirit helpers are the ones who are helping us most of all. I've often said to people and thought to myself that whether I myself am seeing a spiritual director regularly or not, because I go through different periods of that, my shamanic practice spirit helpers, they're like spiritual directors. They help me understand. They help me explore spirituality. They help me explore my own practice and how to deepen it. They literally give me instructions on how to practice sometimes. Well, how about you do this instead of that? So the spirits will often tell me, and all of us, they will often give us directives for things that might help our development or anything else, practically speaking. I mean, there was a point in my life where I was buying a house with my partner, and I got some really good suggestions from spirits about one particular choice, and they were like, no, don't go that way. You're going that way instead. And that's the way that we ended up doing it. Anyways, so sometimes they have very good practical tips. But spiritually speaking, the input that can come from a spirit helper, like, for example, I was in a point in my own shamanic practice that felt like I wasn't getting very far when I was journeying on my own. So they gave me the input that I didn't understand at the moment why it was so relevant, but they said, you need to start doing journeys when you're by yourself, standing up and drumming. yourself, for yourself, not listening to a recording. And I was like, really? I'm going to stand up and drum and journey, which made no sense to me at all because it just sounded kind of challenging. But in fact, I began working, practicing, and it's now how I almost always journey. And interestingly, what evolved, which I did not have happening at that point in time, when I'm working with a group, I'm doing the drumming and I'm standing up and drumming and I'm providing the soundtrack if it's a live group by drumming myself. They were teaching me, they were setting me up to practice that in order to then be able to do that in a group. I mean, that's how I interpret it now. So input from spirits can be deeply conducive to our own spiritual development in that way. In lots of ways, actually. I mean, other times I've been told, like, you need to listen to more music. You need to go dancing. You need to eat more protein. I mean,
Very bossy, these spirits.
I- yes, and it's worth mentioning that it's always said, and it's totally true, that you do not need to do anything that they tell you to do. This is, as Michael Harner said, it's a reciprocal relationship. It's an equal partnership with your helpers. They help you, and there are things that they may want you to do to help them in some ways, at least to help them help other people, which is essentially one of the core, like maybe the core purpose of shamanism is to actually help other humans.
Yeah, you mentioned you called it shamanic healing, and I'm curious what type of healing would someone be looking for that they would seek out? What type of healing were you looking for when you sought it out?
Yeah. Well, when I first thought something and found shamanism that met that seeking, I didn't really know what I was looking for. I was in a place of deep grief. And it was also true that in my early journeys, my grandmother felt very present, my grandmother who had just died. And she was so important to me that having a sense that she existed on the spirit realm somewhere. And it wasn't that I talked with her frequently or anything like that, but sometimes she would show up in a journey. And that wasn't why I did the journeys, but it was a great comfort. I didn't know yet, but what was true is that backstory here, not only was I about to be diagnosed with cancer, but my husband and I were also splitting up after being together for 13 years. So it was a pretty intense life crisis overall. Grandmother died, then within a year or so, my husband and I started separating and I then was diagnosed. And it was really a lot, let's say. I think of it as what's called a shamanic death, that it was like so much of me had to go through the sort of spiritual and psychological transformation that those events fostered and were so deeply important for my own emotional and spiritual growth that I wouldn't have gone through that growth if I hadn't had those experiences. So as far as healing and what that might look like, using that as a backdrop, that story, that context of my life. But essentially at that point in my life, I needed physical healing for the cancer, but I also needed, whether you call it psychological or spiritual, I needed healing to address, not to be too melodramatic here, but to address and heal the part of me that actually didn't really want to be alive. And I actually think this is fairly common in a lot of very mystical spiritual people, that we know is this other realm of existence that in my belief we came from and we go back to, even though I can't tell you what it is or what it's like, but there's something, I think. And human life is tough. Human life is tough. Most people have had traumas and heartbreak and disappointments, and I certainly had mine. And that ability to embrace a human life and really say, I want to be here. I'm going to celebrate all of the joy and heartbreak and what is that, Rilke, the terror and the beauty of life, There's some beautiful quote that he has about the terror and the beauty. And to live in that wholeheartedly, I needed to learn how to do that. And luckily, I had 2 young children, which really motivated me to really learn that, because I knew I didn't want to leave them. I did not want to die of cancer. And my spirits literally told me that if I didn't heal that piece of me that didn't really want to be alive totally, that I might not survive the cancer. So that was sort of a combination of physical, psycho, spiritual, all of it together, which for me it was. And it was years of healing with spirit where they helped me understand myself. And they also gave me uh, some practical guidance, not a lot, but things like, feel more joy and dance and listen to music. Like, yeah, that's a healing thing in a way. I mean, for sure. And there are processes that happen within shamanic journeys that are hard to explain, but spiritual healing within journeys is one of the traditions and core practices within shamanism where a healing process happens on the level of non-ordinary reality. And it's hard to explain what that is, and it's hard to know for sure how that affects you. And I can't guarantee, like, okay, well, if someone does this particular process, you're going to have a healing. I don't know if that's true. And it may be that it requires many types of spiritual and physical and ordinary reality interventions to bring the healing that is needed. I tend to work on the level of the psychospiritual with people because that's, for one, where I am the most experienced myself, because I don't know what spirits did to help cure my cancer. I just I can't state for sure anything about that. I know that chemotherapy was helpful and surgeries were helpful, and maybe the spirits had a large part in that. I don't know. But I do know that they very much helped me heal my own presence, my own ability to embrace this life and to stay here. So that's the kind of thing, whether it's, heartbreak that's keeping someone limited, or somebody has fear that needs to be addressed, that spirit might help them work with in some way, or not understanding what their true calling is in their life and how to move forward in that way. The way I think about it is that spirit can be, and helping spirits can work with most things that you bring, but we don't know exactly what they might do or what they could do, because we also don't really know. We don't get to decide what actually is the fate that we get. Like, I couldn't say, oh, well, I know that I won't die of cancer because I'm doing this work or this medication. It's like, we don't know. So it's a process of a combination of what happens in journeys, how we integrate, as you asked about, how we integrate what we're told, how we take that in, how that affects our behavior, and then also whatever those processes are that happen on the level of things we can't understand, non-ordinary spiritual reality. I think that there are I always like to refer to, I think that there are studies that show that long distance prayer can help people heal, and that shamanism similarly can have an impact.
I mean, there's lots of studies and even Western medicine of like the mindset of a person going into surgery plays a huge role in the success rate in the surgery, especially iffy surgeries that, you're not sure how it's going to turn out. It plays a huge role in recovery. I mean.
Yeah, exactly. So we can't quite explain that, but yeah, and that's the level on which shamanic healing can happen also, I think, that in that realm.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds like it would be. So you've mentioned drumming during the journeys and drumming for yourself during your own shamanic journeys. Are there other like practices or rituals that you do that help you feel connected and grounded? Do you ever just drum just because like it's nice to drum sometimes, and that feels maybe not for play, but not necessarily specifically for a journey, but just like as a spiritual grounding type of thing.
Yeah. And part of what's connected to that is that the shamanic journey that we've referred to and talked about a lot is not the only practice that happens within a shamanic way of being. So certainly sometimes I might journey or frequently rattle when oftentimes I do both and I love both. Sometimes just to sort of call in the presence of spirit. I'm not journeying, but I'm calling it, like, even sometimes, like before this conversation, I did just like a couple minutes of rattling as a way to call in my spirits and say, I want to have a conversation that's clear and let whatever needs to come through come through. So asking for help from spirit in moments and using the drum or a rattle to do that. Another practice that is not a journey is also, but similarly, using the drum as a way to ask spirit to go help others. Like, if someone asks for help with something, that we can drum and ask spirit to go and help them with that thing. Oftentimes it's like some sort of a healing that's needed. It's like sending prayers to somebody, except it's doing it in the shamanic version with the drum or rattles. I don't do that so much for grounding per se. I mean, I'm saying that, and on the other hand, it is how I really deeply connect to spirit in however I'm doing that. Like, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. I was just curious if you utilized it outside of those particular like ritualistic places.
Yeah, and I don't use my drum in ways that are not spiritually meaningful. It's not a musical instrument. Yeah. So, but there's a whole bunch of different things it could be. Like, for example, clearing a house, like coming into a house for the first time, like a new home or something, walking through. I think I did this in this home. I can't remember if I think I used rattles for that. Like walking through each room and sort of going through and asking spirit, or just rattling in the sort of the good spirit help that I wanted present in this space, and asking anything that needed to be cleared to be cleared. So yeah, that's a different kind of a ritual, but there really are all kinds of things. I mean, I recently this was coming from a specific culture. I was asked to do an aya despacho, which is rooted in Peruvian Q'ero shamanism, and for bereaved parents. It's a ritual that's done for people, but that one had rattling throughout as a way to sort of hold the ritual space. So there are lots of ways that can be done.
I like the idea of using it. I've heard of like house blessings where people use like from the Christian perspective, holy water or of smudging and then with the sage. So there's all these different ways that we make a house into our home and invite it to clear itself out from any energies that have been in there. There's some need across humanity to do that, which is really beautiful. It's not something I've thought about much, but when my husband and I were looking for a house, we'd go in and we would immediately know by how it felt if that was going to be the place or not. These places have a sense of self in some ways, and
Yeah.
asking it to let you be part of it is an important, I think.
Yeah, and the same thing on the lot that my house is on now. Like, I connected to the spirits, whomever they might be, and got some sense. I couldn't tell you exactly who they were, but some sense of invitation from them. So it's important.
You have interchanged or used both spirit, as in almost capital S, I would think, in the way that you're using it, and spirits, which I would almost see as lowercase s, maybe. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about what that looks like for you, and it may just be mystery and that's the answer and that's totally fine. But if there's like an interaction between that, or like are the spirits part of spirit? Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, having gone to seminary, I had to think about some of this.
Yeah.
I definitely can talk about it, and I do ultimately believe that I don't know. I have no idea what's true. I don't believe any of us actually do, but I do have my framework, and it's essentially what you just said. And you caught on very accurately. I do use the word spirit, capital S, to refer to all of it, meaning that which any of us believe in, that any of us that have any sense of something beyond the tangible material world, or even for some folks, it's an element of the tangible physical world, like someone who might be agnostic at most, but more like a spiritual naturalist, that spirit still can be part of that. Spirit can be the trees, and not in the animist shamanic way, but just that that's what the natural world is. But I digress. Spirit for me does encompass all of it, and also including theologies and ways of belief that are very different than my own, because I talk a lot to people of diverse faiths in my seminary. So spirit is the overarching mystery. And then spirits, my helping spirits, they are the ones that I connect to, or the ones that I might meet in a journey, or including, because I do have a very animist perspective as shamanism involves, the spirits of the trees and the grass and the water and the clouds and the weather, and like the belief that all of these things have some consciousness or spiritness that I may or may not be able to connect to, but I also sometimes do. So those are the small s spirits found in different places in our world and in journeys, and of course beyond our world, of course. And the interesting piece is how those connect. I recently did a journey, and I was taken way up into the sky. Way, 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 way up. I forget how I even got there. Somebody flew me like I was on the back of a flying somebody, I think. I can't quite describe it, but I was having an experience of connecting to and feeling the presence of something that was way bigger than what I usually encounter in my journeys. Like it just had this expansive quality to it. And I was up in the stars, like I was up in the universe. And then I thought, oh, and I got, I think, an affirmation of this. It almost feels like this is the spirit of the universe. And then later I thought, and maybe that's what God is, maybe that's what I call spirit, capital S. I mean, if all of everything is contained in the universe, and that's all that is, which is also a phrase I have used at times to describe God, all that is, all that is, I really conceive as the spirits that I actually interact with. They are connected to this all that is, and they're just more connected than I am, way more connected than I am. They're part of it in a way. I believe we're all part of it, but they're closer. They're more in communication. I don't know anything about all that, but that's what it feels like, you know? And that's how I like to think of it. And I'm really okay not knowing. Anytime anybody might ask me, well, do you believe in God? I'll be like, well, can you define for me what God is? And I'll tell you if I believe in that or not. I believe that there is something much bigger than what I even can encounter or describe.
That's a really good answer to that question.
I know, right?
Yeah, because it really depends. Like, what do you mean by that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Are there any So something I like to ask people, because a lot of the major religions provides answers to some of the same questions that have come up over the centuries. Things like, who are we? Why are we here? what happens after death? What does it mean to be a good person? And it's nice, I think, when you're in those communities to have a common answer. It's comforting and encouraging and supportive in that way. And so for those of us who maybe are not operating from within a cohesive faith community, we have different ways of looking at those questions, whether they're even important to us or not, I think is one of the first questions. Does it matter to me where we come from or where we're going? But I'm just curious if there are anything that like a big question that you're sitting with right now.
Yeah. I think the biggest question that is very active for me lately, which in some ways has probably been for quite a long time also, but more poignantly recently, relates to that question of, well, I'll just phrase it my way. It kind of relates to one of the questions you said, but what is it that we are called to do as people who believe in spirit and who are wanting and trying to live a life in alignment with spirit, like spirit meaning God and goodness in the very, very infinite sense of the word? What is it we're called to do at this point in time? Because I don't believe, as Gandhi said, that politics and spirituality are totally separate arenas.
Mm.
And I think that the human race, this is a big statement, but I'm not by any means the only person to say this, that human beings too often have lost the connection to what I think spirituality is, which I do think is all about connection and loving and honoring all living beings, all living pieces of this earth and this existence, and that's gotten too lost. So how do I, specifically, how do I bring my deep belief in that divine power to the world? Like, what is it? What am I called to do
Mm.
to have any impact? Or is that not even a possibility? Is it that this human evolution is unfolding as it unfolds, and it may be that we all live our individual lives and the whole, but I tend to believe that the human consciousness as a big picture, as a whole, that how do I put this? In the same way you were talking earlier about how, medically speaking, it can have an impact what your mindset is going into an operation. I think at this point in time, it has an impact how we're holding the question of existence and love and connection and where we're going and how can we help the world, meaning the human species, move in a better direction, move in a good direction, a direction that is more rooted in love and care than it sometimes is. That is my question lately. And it's for me, but it's also more generally, like, I think the monk in a cave meditating and praying 24 hours a day, does that have an impact? Do my shamanic journeys and my teaching other people to do that, does that have an impact? Is that the impact I'm supposed to have? Like your conversations like this, is that what is your way of having an impact?
Yeah. This whole last week I've been sitting with, is this enough? What am I really doing here? Is holding this space enough? Holding this space of openness and conversation and in my companioning, like of just being with people where they're at. Is that enough? I mean, yeah. And I don't have the answers, but I know what it feels like. So
And what does it feel like?
feels like wholeness.
Yeah. I have gotten from my spirit helpers, I continue to get confirmation that this is my way
Mm-hmm.
of bringing spirit to our existence.
Yeah. I do biospiritual focusing, don't know if you're familiar with this and type of embodiment, companioning, and in my own sessions with my spiritual director as well, who also does biospiritual focusing with me, there's a very clear yes, this is what you should be doing, absolutely. Sometimes it's hard to remember that when things get really bad in the world and you're like, what is my role here?
Yeah. And I, over and over again, have to go back to the knowing that we're each one person and we each do what we can do. And spirit is much stronger than we think, I think. I think the spirituality of our being is much stronger than we think. I hope it is anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we close out with my last question?
What just came to my mind is I would wish for everyone to, I know for me, there was such a long process of following and learning to trust and finding my own way to really connect to spirit and learning to listen, not to people, but to that other level of knowing and the other level of input. So I guess just that feels so important for all of us to continue to foster that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that inner knowing, that intuition that we're so separated from in our hearts. It requires stillness and quiet, and we just don't have a whole lot of that.
Right. Stillness and quiet is so important. So important. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything I'd like to leave our listeners with something to savor from you? Is there anything that a mantra or a poem or just, it doesn't have to be profound. It just has to be something that's true for you.
Well, what occurs to me is actually a question because it was recently asked of me by one of my spirit helpers, and I had to contemplate it for a whole week or so before I had a response. It's very simple in a way, but it also felt really important. The question I was asked, and I'll give a context first, which I was taken to a place in a journey that had this very strong vibration, like powerful energy to it. And I was told it was a place of transformation. It was a place that one would go into for a process of transformation. But that before you could do that, you had to really know what it is that you wanted transformed in yourself. You had to make that decision and to know what really is calling to be transformed in you. But that was the question that I sat with, and I wanted to share that. I want to share that because it felt like a really powerful question. What is it that you would want transformed in yourself at this point?
The Spacious Unknown is a living, shared space, and I encourage you to consider adding your voice to the conversation. If you feel the pull to share your own unfolding story, follow the Share Your Story link in the show notes. If you're feeling drawn to explore your own spiritual life more deeply, I've also included information about spiritual companioning. The Spacious Unknown is part of Unfurl, my publication on Substack, and is produced by Embodied Conversations, LLC. Thank you for being here and for listening with care. Until next time, may you keep listening for what is true as you move through the wide and spacious unknown.